There is a dangerous skill the samurai believed every man must learn. Without it, even the strongest warrior becomes weak. Because a man who cannot control his mind will eventually lose control of his life. Anger will control him. Fear will control him. Desire will control him. But a man who masters this one skill becomes almost impossible to manipulate. Miyamoto Musashi trained it every single day. And once you understand it, you will start seeing why most people today are unknowingly living without real control over themselves. Most men spend their entire lives trying to become stronger, faster, smarter, more successful. They chase new skills, new strategies, new habits, hoping that one day everything will finally fall into place. But the samurai believed something very different. They believed that before a man learns how to conquer the world, he must first learn how to conquer something far more dangerous: his own mind. Because the truth is uncomfortable. Most people are not defeated by their enemies. They're defeated by their impulses, by anger they cannot control, by distractions they cannot resist, by emotions that push them into decisions they later regret. A man may look powerful on the outside, but if his mind is easily shaken, his power is fragile. This is why the samurai trained one skill above all others. A skill so dangerous that once a man masters it, very few forces in the world can manipulate him again. It is not sword fighting. It is not strategy. It is not brute strength. It is the ability to remain completely calm when chaos appears. The samurai called this state feudal, the immovable mind, a mind that does not panic under pressure, does not react impulsively to provocation, and does not lose clarity when emotions begin to rise. Imagine what that kind of control would do for your life. Think about the last time someone insulted you, criticized you, or disrespected you. Most people immediately react. They defend themselves, argue, or let anger take control. In that moment, the other person is no longer the problem. The real problem is that your emotional reaction has hijacked your thinking. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine someone trying to provoke you, expecting the usual response, but instead, they meet complete calm. No anger, no panique, no loss of control, just quiet awareness and deliberate action. That is power. The samurai understood that emotional reactions are one of the easiest ways to control another human being. If someone can predict how you will react, they can influence your decisions. They can push your buttons. They can manipulate your behavior without you even realizing it. But a man with an immovable mind becomes unpredictable. He observes before reacting. He chooses his response instead of surrendering it to emotion. And that single ability changes everything. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary swordsman who fought over 60 duels without defeat, spoke about this principle repeatedly. According to Musashi, the greatest mistake a warrior could make was allowing fear, anger, or excitement to disturb the mind before a battle even began. Because the moment your mind loses balance, your opponent has already gained the advantage. But this idea goes far beyond combat. In modern life, the battles look different. The pressure comes from deadlines, competition, social expectations, rejection, uncertainty. Every day, situations appear that try to shake your emotional stability. And most people fail this test constantly without noticing. But the samurai created a system to train the mind so deeply that external chaos could not easily disturb it. And the first step of that system begins with understanding something that most people completely misunderstand about emotions themselves. Most people believe emotions control them. They believe anger appears, and suddenly they must react. Fear appears, and suddenly they must retreat. Anxiety appears, and suddenly their mind spirals into endless overthinking. It feels automatic, almost unavoidable. But the samurai rejected this belief completely. They understood that emotions themselves are not the true problem. The real danger lies in the gap between emotion and awareness. For the average person, that gap is almost non-existent. An emotion appears, and within a fraction of a second the reaction follows. Someone insults them, and they fire back immediately. Something stressful happens, and their mind jumps into panic. Desire appears, and their attention is captured without resistance. It is like a chain reaction that runs without interruption. The samurai trained to expand that gap. That single moment between stimulus and response was where real power lived. If a man could slow that moment down, even slightly, he could observe the emotion instead of becoming it. And once you can observe an emotion, you're no longer controlled by it. Imagine standing beside a river. Thoughts and emotions are like the water flowing past you. Most people fall into the river and are carried away by the current. One moment they are calm, the next moment they're drowning in anger, stress, or desire. But the disciplined mind learns to stand on the bank and watch the current move without being dragged away by it. This is why samurai training focused so heavily on stillness. Meditation was not simply a spiritual ritual. It was psychological training. By sitting in silence and observing their thoughts without reacting, warriors slowly strengthened the muscle of awareness. At first, the mind resisted. Thoughts rushed in from every direction. Old memories, random worries, imagined scenarios. But with practice, something subtle began to happen. The samurai realized that thoughts appear and disappear constantly, yet they are not the thoughts themselves. They are the observer behind them. That realization changes everything. Because once you understand that emotions are temporary events inside the mind, you stop treating them as commands. Anger becomes a signal instead of an order. Fear becomes information instead of paralysis. Even desire loses its hypnotic power when you see it clearly. Miyamoto Musashi wrote that a warrior must keep his spirit calm even in the midst of chaos. Not because chaos disappears, but because clarity is impossible when the mind is disturbed. A disturbed mind makes reckless decisions. A calm mind sees opportunities others miss. Think about the most successful people you know. Whether in business, leadership, sports, or creativity, they all share one invisible advantage. They do not panic easily. While others lose control under pressure, they remain focused. This is the dangerous skill the samurai were cultivating. Not emotional suppression, but emotional mastery. The ability to experience feelings without being dominated by them. But awareness alone is not enough. Once the samurai learned to observe their emotions, they practiced something even more difficult. They deliberately placed themselves in situations where their mind would be tested. Because a calm mind is not built in comfort. It is forged in pressure. And that is where the real training begins. Once a samurai understood the importance of awareness, the next phase of training began. This stage was far more difficult because it required facing pressure deliberately instead of avoiding it. The samurai believed that a calm mind built only in peaceful moments was unreliable. True mastery appeared only when the mind remained steady while everything around it was unstable. To develop this strength, warriors placed themselves in controlled challenges that forced their emotions to surface. They practiced sparring matches where the opponent attacked suddenly and aggressively. They trained in harsh weather, long hours, and uncomfortable conditions, not to prove toughness, but to observe how their mind behaved under stress. When fatigue appeared, they watched it. When frustration appeared, they watched it. When the urge to quit appeared, they watched that too. The purpose was simple. Every time a warrior experienced pressure without losing clarity, his mind became slightly stronger. Over time, the situations that once felt overwhelming began to feel ordinary. This principle applies far beyond the battlefield. In modern life, pressure arrives in different forms. It appears in demanding work, difficult conversations, unexpected problems, financial stress, or moments when you feel judged by others. Most people try to escape these situations as quickly as possible. They avoid discomfort because it feels unpleasant. But the samurai saw discomfort differently. They treated it as training. If a conversation made them nervous, they faced it. If a challenge seemed intimidating, they moved toward it instead of away from it. Every difficult moment became an opportunity to strengthen the immovable mind. Think about how different your life would look if you approach challenges this way. Instead of seeing pressure as something that threatens you, you would begin to see it as something that develops you. When a problem appears, your first reaction would not be panic. It would be curiosity. You would ask yourself a simple question: can I remain calm here? That question alone shifts the entire situation. Because once you focus on maintaining calmness, your attention moves away from fear and toward control. The samurai also practiced another habit that modern society rarely encourages. They limited unnecessary distractions. Warriors understood that a mind constantly flooded with stimulation becomes weak and impatient. If a person spends all day jumping between entertainment, noise, and endless information, their ability to sit calmly with a single task slowly disappears. This is why samurai training included long periods of silence, time spent walking, observing nature, practicing their craft without interruption. These moments strengthened focus the same way physical training strengthens muscles. In contrast, modern life often trains the opposite habit: constant scrolling, constant notifications, constant stimulation. The mind becomes addicted to novelty and begins to struggle whenever things become slow or challenging. But a man who can focus deeply while others are distracted gains an enormous advantage. He finishes work faster. He sees solutions others overlook. He becomes reliable under pressure. And over time, people begin to notice something different about him: a quiet confidence, a calm presence that does not disappear when situations become tense. But the samurai understood that mastering the mind required one final shift. Because remaining calm is powerful, yet the real transformation happens when calmness becomes your identity. The final transformation the samurai pursued was not just temporary calmness. It was becoming the kind of person whose mind naturally returned to balance, no matter what situation appeared. In other words, calmness was no longer something they forced themselves to practice. It became part of who they were. This shift is subtle, but extremely powerful. Most people rely on motivation to control their behavior. When they feel motivated, they act with discipline. When motivation fades, their habits collapse. The samurai knew that motivation is unreliable. Identity is what truly shapes behavior. If a man sees himself as someone who loses control easily, he will continue reacting impulsively. But if he begins to see himself as someone who remains steady under pressure, his actions slowly align with that belief. This is why samurai training emphasized daily rituals. Simple, repeated actions that reinforced discipline every single day. Waking early, practicing their craft, sitting in stillness, observing their thoughts. Each small action strengthened the identity of a disciplined warrior. Over time, these habits created a powerful internal message. I'm the kind of man who does not panic. I'm the kind of man who thinks clearly. I am the kind of man who chooses his response instead of surrendering to impulse. Once this identity formed, emotional chaos lost much of its influence. Imagine two men facing the same stressful situation. One of them immediately assumes he will struggle. His mind fills with doubt and worry before the challenge even begins. The other man sees difficulty as part of his training. He expects pressure, and because of that expectation, he remains steady. The situation is identical, but the mindset completely changes the outcome. This is why the immovable mind was considered such a dangerous skill. A person who cannot be easily shaken becomes incredibly difficult to manipulate. Insults do not provoke him. Fear does not paralyze him. Pressure does not cause him to collapse. While others are reacting emotionally, he is thinking strategically. History repeatedly shows that calm thinkers often defeat stronger opponents simply because they maintain clarity when others lose it. The samurai recognized this advantage centuries ago, but the most surprising benefit of this skill appears in everyday life. When your mind becomes calm and stable, people begin to trust you more. Friends respect your judgment. Colleagues rely on your decisions. Opportunities appear because others sense that you can handle responsibility. Calmness becomes a form of quiet authority. You do not need to dominate conversations or prove your strength loudly. Your composure speaks for itself. And in a world where most people react impulsively, the ability to remain centered becomes rare and valuable. But there is still one final truth the samurai understood. Mastering the mind is not a destination you reach once and keep forever. It is a daily practice. And the moment you forget that practice, chaos begins to return. What makes this skill truly dangerous is not that it gives you control over others. It is that it gives you control over yourself in moments where most people surrender that control without noticing. When someone insults you and you remain calm, you are free. When pressure rises and your mind stays clear, you are free. When temptation appears and you can observe it without being dragged away by it, you are free. The samurai understood that this kind of freedom is rare. Most people spend their entire lives reacting to circumstances instead of shaping them. Their mood depends on what happens around them. Their decisions depend on their emotions in the moment. Their focus is constantly hijacked by distractions they never chose consciously. But the immovable mind breaks that cycle. Once you begin practicing awareness, you start noticing something surprising. Situations that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Conversations that once triggered anger become opportunities to respond with clarity. Problems that once caused panic begin to look like puzzles waiting to be solved. Nothing outside has changed. The world is still chaotic, unpredictable, sometimes unfair. The difference is that your internal state is no longer controlled by every external event. This is exactly why the samurai valued this skill above almost everything else. Swordsmanship could defeat an opponent in battle. Strategy could win a war. But mastery of the mind allowed a warrior to remain effective in every situation. Without that mastery, even the strongest fighter could lose control at the worst possible moment. And this lesson applies just as strongly today. Modern battles may not involve swords, but they still require the same mental stability. Careers demand focus under pressure. Relationships require emotional control. Personal goals demand discipline when motivation fades. The man who can stay calm while others panic gains a silent advantage in every area of life. So the question is simple. What kind of mind are you training each day? Every moment of distraction trains impatience. Every emotional outburst trains instability. Every time you react without awareness, the mind becomes slightly weaker. But the opposite is also true. Every time you pause before reacting, the mind becomes stronger. Every moment of focused work sharpens your attention. Every challenge faced calmly strengthens the immovable mind. The transformation does not happen overnight. The samurai understood this deeply. They practiced daily, year after year, shaping their character slowly until discipline felt natural. You can begin that same process today with a single decision. The next time a stressful moment appears, do not rush to react. Pause, breathe, observe your mind. That small pause is the first step toward mastery. And if you want to continue learning the timeless principles that build unshakable discipline, focus, and inner strength, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because the path of mastery does not end with one lesson. It is a journey, and the next step might change the way you see your mind forever.